are possible for Northern Ireland. These are most likely towards the north coast, but for many it will be a dry evening, albeit also rather cloudy. The showers will feed further southwards overnight, though southern England will remain dry and turn chilly under the clear skies. And that's how the weather is shaping up over tonight until tomorrow morning.
On Monday, we as the United Kingdom gather to mourn, pay tribute and give thanks to Queen Elizabeth II. Here at GB News, we invite you to gather with Anne Diamond, historian David Starkey, and myself, Alastair Stewart, live from Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, all day Monday.
Good afternoon. You are watching and listening to GB News on TV, online and digital radio. I am Bev Turner. I'm here instead of Nana today. She's taken a day off. Now, following the death of Her Majesty the Queen, we're going to continue to bring you the latest as this country comes to terms with life in Britain under a new monarch. Joining me for the show this afternoon are historian and broadcaster Rafe Haydel-Mankoo and royal broadcaster and photographer Helena Shard. Now, waiting times are expected to be around 16 hours at the moment for those paying tribute to the Queen. GB News South West of England reporter Jeff Moody is going to be coming to us in a moment. He's in the queue at the moment. He's been there since this morning. I'm going to ask you guys before we go to Jeff, is it the kind of thing you would like to do, to stand in the queue, Helena, all that time?
Do you know, in a normal situation, absolutely not. I don't fancy 20 hours or whatever it is, but I think, you know, Her Majesty the Queen, absolutely worth it. And, you know, all the stories that are coming out, people talking and everyone's uniting and it makes everyone feel so proud, you know, we're all out, we're there, just stoic, and it's been very calm and peaceful and I feel really proud of everybody as well, so... Yeah,
how about you, Rafe? You didn't fancy the queue?
I would have loved to have gone, but unfortunately I've not had a sufficient gap in my schedule to allow me to go. Because, yes, I think people who will have regrets if they don't go. Yeah. It's going to be one of those moments in history which we'll be talking about in decades to come, if not centuries to come, actually, if this is, as we believe, the longest queue in history for the longest reign in history. People still talk about lining up for Churchill's funeral, don't they?
Yeah.
And to miss out on that, because actually, by going to that queue, you're actually becoming part of history as well.
We're seeing some of the pictures here. These are the live pictures down by the Thames with, of course, Parliament over the water. It's been the most perfect autumnal day in London today. It's been about 17 or 18 degrees. The sun has been shining brightly. There's barely a cloud in the sky, as you can see there. A small smattering of clouds I noticed earlier as I was coming in, but it is Great Britain at its best, isn't it, Helena? And people will be watching these images all around the world. It's great for the country to see the landscape that we have, but also the kind of people that we have and the unity.
Yeah, which is brilliant. And not just that, you know, King Charles III and I've got to remember it's Prince of Wales, yeah. was out in force and speaking to everybody and shaking hands, and it's that unity and everyone's joined together and I love it. I mean, we're great at fanfare, aren't we, here in this country? So, I know waiting in the queue's not quite that, but in a sense there is that camaraderie. I think it's just brilliant.
It almost wouldn't be the same. I mean, you know, we were chatting about this, I think it was earlier in the week, about whether they'd had an online booking system. Maybe there would have been a queue app where you could book your place and then turn up at an allotted time and in one particular place. But that, I think, wouldn't have been in the spirit of this at all, would it?
The British queue, this is what we do. You wouldn't can't have more of a British occasion than this, you know. And if queuing is a British national pastime, let's say the whole nation has been preparing in training for this moment, the big queue. And I think it's actually quite fitting that you've got this unity of different British institutions together.
And you know, it does show a commitment. It's part of the compromise, the commitment, the sacrifice, if you like, of people that are prepared to do this, to say thank you to the Queen for her service.
That's why I like the idea of calling this the real Elizabeth line.
Yes, isn't that brilliant? rather than the new train. We're looking at pictures of Buckingham Palace, I believe, at the moment. All the police officers in town from different constabularies around the country, of course. I was in London earlier in the week and I saw a van with Lancashire Police down the side of it. It's such, you know, we use the phrase military operation in a metaphorical sense, don't we, Helena? But this genuinely is the military and the security operation. I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of the rooms where these decisions are being made and the instructions are being dished out, wouldn't you?
This has been going on for a long, long time. So this has all been meticulously gone through. And it's just worked incredibly well. I think the only thing is that people are hungry, aren't they? And they were saying that it would be good to have had like burger bars or little food little things walking.
I'm amazed no one thought of that. You know, if you've got a mobile food vendor, this is your golden opportunity. You know, we're told this is the largest gathering, the largest police event since more than the London Olympics in history. So a lost opportunity for our vendors.
Yeah. And what did you think, Rafe, when we saw King Charles earlier and William appear at the queue? Nobody was expecting that. Who would have made the decision to do that? Will that have been up to them, or will their security or their PR team?
Well, I certainly think they would have thought it only right that they do so. I was hoping they would visit. I was expecting it to happen, actually, and I'm so pleased that they both did do that, because if you're going to look at the royal family's Praetorian Guard, the most important people, it's the people in the queue. I mean, if you're that determined to see Her Majesty, you deserve to get a royal visit. As I said earlier, the queue now has its own place on the BBC Weather app, along with Reading and Basingstoke. There's the queue, so you can consider this a royal visit to the queue in itself. And we also saw about an hour or so ago the Earl and Countess of Wessex doing a similar walkabout, impromptu. We can see it right here, the footage actually, outside Buckingham Palace. And these crowds never expected to get a royal visit at all, and so that's another little bonus. And, of course, we're seeing this side of the royal family so warm and engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. George, I bet you'll know this, both of you, I'm sure, but George VI lying in state, Rafe. Queen Elizabeth II's father, of course, he drew an immense crowd for his lying in state at Westminster Hall, February 1952, and that was called the Great Queue. Do you know how many people walked past his coffin?
I did not. I've forgotten, but remind me.
Oh, I love the fact that I have a fact that Rafe, the royal expert, doesn't have.
Well, it's very impressive because all of the state funerals had been in January or February, except for Edward VII, which was in May, and our Queen now in nice, sunny, warm weather.
Yes.
But Churchill, Victoria, George V, they've all happened in very cold, inclement weather.
That's right. So George VI was February 1952, and it was 305,806 people. There we go. That's one for your trivia quiz. And I presume somebody's keeping a record of every single person who's going through Westminster Hall this week as well. I guess there'll be a head count. Well,
there are those, what do you call those metal gates? You have to turnstile gates at the end of Westminster Hall. Anyone who's been there, whether those, I would pity anyone's thumb if they're there making those physical counts.
Well, look, our very own Jeff Moody has taken this pilgrimage for us here at GB News. Hello, Jeff. I was watching you at my parents' house this morning when you set out on your journey. And listen, I've just got to say, my parents have watched GB News wall-to-wall royal coverage. They are absolutely loving it, and you are a big part of that, Jeff. How has your day been, and where are you now?
Oh, do you know, it's been incredible. And we started at 9:30 this morning. We're now outside the Tate Modern Millennium Bridge there. So this is as far as we're going. We're going to have to keep moving while we talk because I keep losing my place in the queue. Interesting what you were saying about food. Yes, that really is something that is lacking at the moment because there's no food vendors around and people don't want to leave the queue. I mean, there are restaurants, but people don't really want to leave the queue to go off and find something to eat. A very nice person just gave me a marmalade sandwich. So in honour of Her Majesty, I've had something to eat, a marmalade sandwich. There was a lady that was with me that started out at the beginning at 9:30 this morning. She's got as far as now, and she suddenly said to me, "How come you've got a wristband and I haven't?" And I said, "Well, you need a wristband to do this." And she forgot to pick one up at the beginning. So she's having to go back to the beginning of the queue. and redoing the whole thing because she doesn't have a wristband. How can you imagine what that must be like, having to do the whole thing again? Yes, there's a great atmosphere, as we've been hearing, but it certainly helps that the weather's so good and the views are so good. You know, we're just meandering along by the Thames, and the views are fantastic. Let's go and see if we can talk to some people. Who should we pick? Who should we pick? Let's try these people here. Hello.
Hiya.
Are you having a good time so far?
It's been lovely so far.
It's been really nice with the weather as well, isn't it?
We've been really lucky with the weather today, haven't we?
Yeah, and the views, incredible views.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How far have you travelled to be here?
From Leicester.
You've come down from Leicester this morning?
Yes.
And I'm from Leeds. I came last night.
Wow. and how long did it take you to get down from Leicester? What time did you set off this morning?
I set off about 6:30.
6:30 this morning?
Yeah.
Yeah, I left about 6:30 this morning. It's a long day, isn't it? But
But
what
it'll be worth it.
Certainly it'll be worth it. What made you decide to come to London to do it?
I wouldn't be able to do it again. And I feel quite... I have a lot of love for the Queen. And I feel a lot more patriotic now than I did a few years ago. And so I thought it was a good opportunity to come in, pay my respects and say goodbye.
We're just going to keep walking because we have been told we mustn't, under any circumstances, stop the queue for obvious reasons. So we'll keep talking. And have you thought about how you might feel when you get in there?
I feel like it's going to be a lot more emotional than it is right now. Like,
Yeah.
it's been such a lovely day today, and we've been really quite happy, and it's gone really fast.
It's strange, this whole process, isn't it? Because to start with, we were so shocked to hear the news, really shocked, unbelievably shocked considering that she was 96.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we're hearing about the new king, and it's quite jubilant. We've got the proclamations, and then we go back to mourning again. It's very up and down, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have you found that as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 1 minute, especially when I found out on the news, I was crying, but then at the same time, it's quite a happy thing that you've got a new king.
Yeah. It's continuity,
Yeah.
isn't it? Well, very nice to talk. How are your feet so far?
Absolutely fine.
Good.
I mean,
good.
I'm
Came
all in
prepared.
black, but I've got pink trainers on because I had to be comfortable.
Absolutely. I've still got my black shoes on, although I did bring some trainers just in case. Do you know how long we've got to go?
Not got a clue, but we'll keep waiting.
I think it's something like 4.5 hours, so that's not too bad. The thought of staying in a queue for the next 4 or 5 hours is actually quite pleasant because it's such a lovely day and the atmosphere is great. Back to you.
Lovely, thank you, Jeff. Keep moving, don't you? Don't hold up that queue. I'm going to come to my panel. We'll go to Jeff later, of course. I was just reading, actually, that yesterday when Prince Charles was in Wales, one of the crowd members handed him a pen to say, just in case you need a pen, we know you've had some problems with this. He took it in good grace, though, Rafe. He was laughing and joking about it. He needs to, doesn't he? Because it didn't look good when he lost his temper about the leaky pen.
That's right. I mean, an unfortunate little clip to be broadcasting to go global, but considering the pressure that he's under, considering the strain of losing your mother as well, not yet having had a time to mourn, I think we can forgive him a bit of a short temper. But yes, you can see the other side to the king in the footage that we saw of this pen being received. He's got a cheeky sense of humour.
Yeah.
There was a twinkle in his eye when he received it, and certainly he probably can now see the funny side of the whole thing.
Helena, who do you think it has come out well in the last week in terms of the public's feelings towards the royal family? I think the Princess of Wales, the new Princess of Wales, Kate Middleton, never drops a ball, does she? She's incredibly impressive.
She's fabulous. In fact, I think she's been keeping quite a low profile, I feel. I've not seen her as much. But then I've been doing different interviews and broadcasts and things. I have to say, for me, I think the Princess Royal is fabulous.
Agree.
I mean, she is just brilliant. And definitely will be King Charles III's wing woman, should I say.
Right-hand man, we nearly said, but right-hand woman, she will
woman,
be.
yeah.
And also Peter Phillips, her son, Zara, of course, her daughter. Two of the most impressive royals. I mean, they don't actually have titles, do they? But it will be interesting to see what they do now with King Charles, Rafe. Do you think we will see a little bit more of them?
No, I mean they're not working members of the royal family. They won't have titles. We can just see Peter Phillips there in the screen, and the viewers can see. But they will be. Of course there will be the vigil tonight. And there we can see with the beard the Earl of St Andrews as well, son of the Duke of Kent. But there will be a vigil of the 8 grandchildren. At the head of the coffin will be the Prince of Wales in uniform. At the foot of the coffin will be Prince Harry. But Zara Tindall and Peter Phillips will be around the coffin as their mother was yesterday, becoming the first female to make the vigil of the princes dressed in the uniform of the Colonel of the Blues and Royals.
Absolutely.
Looking very striking.
Well, let's go to Tom Harwood, GBNews political correspondent. You are down at Westminster, Tom. What have you been doing today for us? What have you seen? What have been the highlights of today?
Yes, well, after 3 days of reporting on the queue from the south bank of the Thames, I've now made my way across to the north bank of the Thames, to this side of the Palace of Westminster, and we've been exploring exactly what is going on with the politics of all of this, what's to come in the next few weeks in what has been the most extraordinary start to a premiership that I think anyone has really seen for quite some time. Let's not forget, it was only last week that Liz Truss became Prime Minister, when Elizabeth II was still, many people thought, soundly on the throne. Thursday was that big energy announcement freezing the energy bills for people and businesses across the country, and only a matter of hours later the world turned upside down. The event that everyone had dreaded, but I suppose people must have thought inevitable at some stage, the very sad death of Her late Majesty the Queen. Now that has turned what was supposed to be a very rapid set of announcements for this new government, for this new Prime Minister. That's turned that on its head. We've only had one such announcement so far, that energy bill freeze, and all of this big plan, the grid, as they call it in Number 10, trying to control the news agenda, saying this is going to be what we're talking about today, this is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, policy after policy, looking like the government is busy. That has all been paused, of course. What we're seeing this weekend is world leaders coming to London. Some have already started arriving. We're seeing some informal meetings in Downing Street tomorrow. And then, of course, the big event, the event that will be watched by billions around the world in Westminster Abbey tomorrow, the funeral of Her late Majesty. But the politics doesn't stop. Parliament, although on pause at the moment, returns in the middle of next week. First for members of Parliament to swear their new oaths, to swear or affirm, I should say, if they're irreligious, their new oaths to the King. And then we're expecting potentially a mini budget, a fiscal statement towards the end of next week as well, getting that agenda for government back on the rails. Before that, however, UNGA, the UN General Assembly meeting in New York. The Prime Minister Liz Truss is expected to go to New York in the middle of next week to attend that with many of the same world leaders who will have been in London just a couple of days beforehand. It has been announced as well that there will be a formal bilateral meeting between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom expected on Wednesday in New York. Then, of course, that mini budget towards the end of the week, and then Labour Party conference at the weekend and the start of the next week, followed by the Conservative Party conference the week after that. Politics is getting busy, and it also is getting so busy because there's only been a very few number of sitting days of Parliament since the summer recess. It looks like this conference recess will be curtailed, drawn back by a week, so that after Conservative Party conference, instead of getting an extra week off for MPs to sun themselves on a beach somewhere, or they would insist going back and doing vital constituency work. Well, instead of that extra holiday, it looks like conference recess will be curtailed, so it will only last 2 weeks, and some more business of the House can take place in that second week in October.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. I did hear Tom say earlier that the politicians won't have slept for a month, and I thought, neither has Tom Harwood. He's had a very busy time. What a time to be a political correspondent, hey? You've been getting in touch, and please keep your messages coming, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Most of what you're saying at the moment is, well done, GB News, which is lovely. We will take the applause. It says, may I just say, the coverage, GB News' coverage of the death of our beloved Queen and all of the subsequent events has been nothing but spectacular for such a new channel. So respectful, refreshing and informative. Thank you, Mark. And my panellists, Rafe and Helena, can also take some credit for that, because I think everybody here has been doing just a brilliant job. All of the royal experts keeping the likes of me, who don't know very much, informed. OK, we're going to take a quick break, first of all, for the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with clear spells for many, but some showers feeding in from the north. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest of England, and here it will be a fine end to the day with late sunshine leading into largely clear skies for most this evening. Similar in the southeast, temperatures will dip under the clear skies even in London, where it will fall to a chilly 6 Celsius tonight. Whilst the odd shower across North Wales can't be ruled out, across much of the country it will also be a fine end to the day. Around the Midlands there will be barely a cloud in the sky this evening. This does mean it will again turn a little chilly overnight, and then more cloud is likely through the coming days. Some cloud will be feeding in from the north, affecting northeast England this evening. Whilst it will be dry for most, some coastal showers are possible, with strong winds near the coast too. Plenty of showers across much of Scotland this evening, some heavier ones. However, the further south you are, the greater chance there is of staying dry, especially south of the central belt. 1 or 2 showers are possible for Northern Ireland. These are most likely towards the north coast, but for many it will be a dry evening, albeit also rather cloudy. The showers will feed further southwards overnight, though southern England will remain dry and turn chilly under the clear skies. And that's how the weather is shaping up over tonight until tomorrow morning.
On Monday, we as the United Kingdom gather to mourn, pay tribute and give thanks to Queen Elizabeth II. Here at GBNews, we invite you to gather with Anne Diamond, historian David Starkey, and myself, Alastair Stewart, live from Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, all day Monday.
Now, Queen Elizabeth II found out that she had acceded to the throne whilst on a trip to Kenya in 1952. Throughout her reign, she built and maintained relations throughout the Commonwealth, the club of mostly former British colonies, and travelled widely within it. It was an institution she was immensely proud to lead. Now, Chief Operating Officer of the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, Sunil Sharma, joins me now. Hello, Sunil, how are you? Now, first of all, what is your organisation?
So we're a group that essentially looks to lobby governments across the Commonwealth to build closer ties together. So we work with the current Conservative Party, and we try and, we speak to Australia, New Zealand, their respective governments, India, Canada, and just try and build closer ties within each other.
And how many countries are now in the Commonwealth?
So we're on 56. So the Commonwealth started, when the Queen took over, it was 8 nations, and now we're at 56. It's always, one of the things I always do say on these media stuff is it is a voluntary organisation. So although they are mainly comprised of ex-British colonies, everyone there has opted to be a part of the Commonwealth.
Because I think probably the misconception is that maybe the Commonwealth has got smaller from our days of empire, but actually it's actually increased. So do countries, how does it work? Countries apply for membership of the Commonwealth?
That's it. So this year's been amazing because we had 2 countries in Gabon and Togo that didn't actually have any ties to the British Empire, and they decided that they wanted to join the former French colonies, and they said that they felt closer ties towards Britain rather than France, so they wanted to be a part of the Commonwealth. So it's a good point that it is a seemingly growing organisation.
And that presumably they want to be part of it for trade, for financial reasons.
Yeah, I think that's where I think we'd like to see, our governments and other ones do more of. There's so much potential in trade, whether it's foreign policy, human rights issues, all those sort of stuff where there's so much potential there, especially as these countries, they have shared history, shared values. A lot of them are well-functioning democracies. And I think it's becoming more important when you see the issues we're having with China and Russia, and then you've got 56 nations that are almost bound together, so it helps.
And how did Brexit affect the number of countries wanting to come into the Commonwealth. Has that played a factor?
I think it's actually helped. So I think one of the things that a lot of Brexiteers talked about is the fact that we've built ties with European countries, and a lot of the time we actually don't have that much in common with.
Yeah.
And then you've got this group over here who, I don't think it's, I don't think it wants to be or ever will be the EU sort of replacement. But there's no reason why, we can't have closer ties with Canada. A good example is with the European Union. We saw them agreeing. It took 7 years to agree a trade deal with Canada, for example, and it's like a snap of the finger when Liz was Foreign Secretary. So I think it just shows that the Commonwealth has really lots of potential, and in some ways leaving the European Union has actually helped.
I want to bring my panellists in as well a little bit, if I can. Rafe, is the Commonwealth going to be safe in the hands of King Charles III, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, the title of head of the Commonwealth isn't a hereditary title. It was a title agreed upon freely by all of the member states of the Commonwealth, which is important to remember. They have chosen to maintain their association with the Crown. So whilst you may get on the extremes of Twitter all these attempts to try to tie the Commonwealth to the Empire and the excesses of the Empire, the reality is different. The key word here is common. A common language, a common law, common institutions, from Parliament to the police structures, to the military structures, to the civil service, a shared history too. And I've been actually quite keen also on this idea of CANZUK. I like that Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the UK having essentially freedom of movement amongst these countries, because there's a lot more that binds the English-speaking world together, the realms of the English-speaking world, than I would say the European Union member states.
It almost feels ironically, Sunil, doesn't it, that the Commonwealth is in a stronger place than it has been possibly for decades at the moment. That particular club, the unity, the teamwork, in a way, it's not quite the right word, is it? But it's, the joining together, the strength of the union feels stronger than ever.
I think there is a massive, at the moment, pragmatic level to it that I think that's often ignored. We're in such a, precarious position across the globe right now. We're seeing, the conflict we've had with China, the difficulties there, Russia. It just, by pure logic, makes sense that you've got a group of countries that speak the same language, have the shared history, have the shared values. It just makes sense. Even if you take away Commonwealth, you take away all the history, right? Just on a very pragmatic level, it makes sense to, I think CANZUK's fantastic, and I think it's the easiest one. They speak the same language. We have lots of professions already in terms of where you don't require visas. It's a lot easier for doctors, for example, to go to Canada and New Zealand and Canada. So I think there's lots of practical elements that are involved in the Commonwealth, and I think we're now seeing that probably more so in 2022. And I think the Queen, one of her best legacies is the Commonwealth. What she, people really forget where they were post-British Empire as a monarchy, as an institution, when there was just 8 nations. You had issues across all these nations that have become independent. And now you look at India, Australia, these countries have voluntarily chosen to be a part of the Commonwealth. And it's worth noting you can leave, like South Africa, for example, left, then rejoined. So they clearly see value in being a part of the Commonwealth, as opposed to sometimes, like we were saying on the Twitter side of things, where people often talk about us using a soft power or something, or a patronising tone. It's not the case. I think we're seen as equals, all of us, 56. We have some specialties where we're a bit better. There's some of those nations that may be a bit better. You look at Australia's agriculture and stuff like that. So.
Remind me with South Africa then, what happened? Why did they leave, and then why did they come back?
So they similar to actually Australia, there was various debates going on, referendums, and they left, and then they rejoined. I think they saw the value of being part of the Commonwealth. Australia is always the one I particularly like referencing at the moment, because with the change of monarch, I think we'll see probably a bit more of maybe an anti-monarchy movement in this country. But a good example with Australia is they held a referendum in the 90s. The public was, at the time, if you look at the polls, was overwhelmingly anti-monarchy. So it looked as if they were going to leave the Commonwealth, remove the Queen as head of state. And in the end, they couldn't actually, one of the reasons the monarchy stayed on and they stayed part of the Commonwealth, they couldn't come to a universal agreement on what post-monarchy looks like. So the Republic didn't seem to be as good as they thought it would be, and the concept, so they couldn't agree. In the end, they stayed. We have a Prime Minister now in Australia who is well known as making very pro-republic, anti-monarchy comments, and he's now held 15 days of no Parliament because of the Queen's death, and they've got a bank holiday on Thursday. So you can see the full 360, if you like, there. So I think it shows, again, how relevant it is.
Yeah. Fantastic, thank you. Honestly, it feels like every day is a history lesson at the moment, doesn't it? Thank you so much. Sunil Sharma there from the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth. You're watching and listening to Bev Turner here on GB News. It is 4:31 on Saturday afternoon. Now, today is the third full day that the Queen is lying in state in Westminster Hall. We're going to be bringing you all the latest, but right now, let's get the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Good afternoon, it is 4:31. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The King and the Prince of Wales have made a surprise visit, greeting people in the queue to see the Queen lying in state. Hundreds of people cheered as King Charles arrived to speak to those who've been waiting in the line in South London. They offered their condolences to the King and Prince William, who thanked the crowd for standing in the cold throughout the night to pay their respects to the late monarch. The Prince of Wales could be heard asking how long they'd been waiting for. The government website currently suggests the wait time is now 13 hours. The Met Police says it's honoured to have hosted the King and Prince William after they visited the Special Operations Room. King Charles was greeted by the new Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, the Home Secretary and the London Mayor. Both he and Prince William thanked emergency service staff for their work during the period of mourning. The security operation for the state funeral on Monday is set to be the biggest in the Met Police Force's history. Sadiq Khan praised those taking part.
I want to thank the police from around the country, the armed forces personnel, the medics, the volunteers, the stewards, and many, many more people who've been working really hard over years. But I've seen civil servants and others working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, making sure everything is ready.
Later today, Queen Elizabeth's grandchildren will stand guard around her coffin in Westminster Hall. Last night, the late monarch's children, King Charles, the Princess Royal, Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex held their own 15-minute vigil, honouring their mother. Prince Harry has been given special dispensation by his father to wear his military uniform, despite no longer being a working royal. Prince Andrew had been given the same permission. World leaders have started arriving ahead of the state funeral, with around 500 dignitaries expected to attend. A number have visited Westminster Hall to pay their respects, including the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern also attended the Queen's lying in state, as well as the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Rehearsals for the funeral were held in Windsor in the early hours of this morning, with the procession moving down the long walk towards the castle gates. Royal Pageant Master Bruno Peake says a lot of planning has gone into the event.
Rehearsal side is the element that will 99.9% guarantee that you will have a successful event. And again, these guys and these ladies who are actually taking part, well, you know, in the military, this will be such a proud moment for them. So they're going to be making sure that they don't put a step wrong.
In other news, Ukraine says the mass grave discovered in the eastern city of Izium is proof of Russia's war crimes. More than 450 bodies, most of them civilians, were found, some with their hands tied behind their backs. The city was recently liberated after 6 months of Russian occupation. The Kremlin denies it's targeting civilians or committing war crimes. The White House says it will continue to support Ukraine and hold Moscow accountable. This is what spokesman John Kirby had to say.
It's horrifying. It's repugnant. And sadly, it's in keeping with the kind of depravity and the brutality with which Russian forces have been prosecuting this war against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And we're going to continue to actively support efforts to document war crimes and atrocities that Russian forces commit in Ukraine and to assist national and international efforts to identify and hold Russians accountable.
Protesters have been demonstrating outside Scotland Yard over the fatal shooting of Chris Carber. The 24-year-old was killed by an armed officer following a police pursuit in South London 2 weeks ago. Chants of no justice, no peace and no racist police were heard during the protest. It comes as police investigators consider whether race was a factor in the shooting. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens.
You are watching Bev Turner on GB News and listening to me on your radio, hopefully on this beautiful Saturday afternoon as we move gracefully towards the huge state funeral on Monday. Now, following the death of Her Majesty the Queen, we're going to bring you all the latest, of course, as we all come to terms with the new monarch. But let's hear some thoughts and feelings about the late Queen from our very important GB News viewers from around the country. Let's start with John. John Reid is joining us from Kidderminster. Yeah. Hello, John. Nice to see you. Thank you for giving up your time on a Saturday afternoon. This is your big TV moment. How has the week been for you? What have been the highlights? What have been the most moving moments for you of the last few days?
Well, good afternoon, Bev. Yes, I've had some really wonderful moments this week. And of course, I have some wonderful memories of the Queen. I grew up in Ashford in Middlesex, right by Heathrow Airport there, and worked in the Windsor area for many years. So I've seen the surrounding area. I know it very well. In fact, when in the late 70s, I got a job in London, one of the places we visited regularly, because I worked for a manufacturer of catering equipment, was Windsor Castle. I can recall going into the castle kitchens and seeing the menus up on the wall. You know, Princess Anne was going to eat this, and Prince Charles was going to eat something else, and Queen was going to have this, and which room they were having it in. And I made the stupid mistake of asking one of the chefs, you know, are you of the royal household? And he looked at me most indignantly and said, yes, of course. Where the Queen goes, I go. And it was as simple as that, really. I was a lad who grew up in a house which respected very much royalty. I was encouraged to stand to attention when the national anthem was played. And I have really very fond memories of all of that. But you asked me particularly about this last week. And in this last week, I've been doing what I do now. I take poetry into prison for the benefit of the residents of prisons, prisoners you might call them. And this week, we all wrote poetry about the Queen. And the poems that came out of this were absolutely wonderful. And it drove home to me the simple fact that the Queen was loved by everybody. No matter where they were in their life, no matter who they were, she was one to befriend them and know them, and they in turn loved and respected her. So I have some wonderful poetry now as memories of our lovely Queen. And of course, it's been a very hard week, hasn't it, one way and another?
Hasn't it? How lovely, John. What an amazing thing to do, that you go and do that. And of course, all these historic occasions, they often give rise to great works of art, don't they? Paintings or as you say, poetry and music. Let us move on now to our next viewer, Dr. Seshni Modlea, who is getting in touch with us from Milton Keynes. Good afternoon. I believe you've been down, am I right, Seshni, to London this week?
Yes, that's correct. I went last week Saturday. Thank you for having me on. I went last week Saturday following the news that the Queen, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, had passed away. So myself and my kids went to Buckingham Palace to offer our condolences and leave a card and flowers. And I think that was the best thing for us to do in terms of showing our gratitude and how much she meant to us and the people that we know. And we were together with thousands of people that did the same. And yesterday was a very, very moving day. So if I do break down in tears, it was really one of the most difficult things I've had to experience, of being able to go and stand in the queue for the Queen's lying in state, and to see her in Westminster Hall early hours of this morning at 3 a.m. after a 12-hour wait. It was really, as I said, to be honest, it was so difficult. And together with the other mourners, it was a memory that I will cherish forever. You know, I went with my two kids, Satara and Arian, and my eldest daughter couldn't make it, and my husband, Shri and Ferdinand. But going there and being representative of our families was really important, because the Queen, as you heard from John and others, she meant so much to everyone. She was a good monarch, and just to be able to go there and offer respects, to bow our heads to her coffin as she laid there. It was a very sad moment, and I burst into tears as I entered Westminster Hall. I was uncontrollable. It was overwhelming, not something I've experienced before, but not in such emotions. And I was not alone. There were men that were crying as well around me. So it was a very touching moment to be with everyone and all the mourners. And I think the Queen, if she's looking down upon everyone, I think she'd be proud of Britain and how everyone has honoured her. And that's what I felt, and that's what I feel. You know, even though she's gone, she's passed away, I feel somehow, you know, even in the last moment, she's made the decision that we were able to view her body. And I think she's done us great service even up until the end. She was an amazing monarch, as I said. I've got so many fond memories of her growing up in South Africa and being part of the Commonwealth. As you heard from Sunil Sharma, you know, there were very touching moments and relationship between her and South Africa and Nelson Mandela. And because I live in the UK now and work as a psychiatrist, and with my 3 kids that were born here, for me, I felt it was very important for them to say goodbye to her. So that's why Aryan and Satara were able to say goodbye. And I think if everyone has that opportunity to say goodbye to her and to show their gratitude, it's such a special thing to do, because she did mean so much to me, to my family, to friends all over the world, especially South Africa and the UK and India. And also she touched our lives. You know, she was kind, she was loving, she was caring. And as I said,
if I can just ask you a question, do you think you will have the same adoration for the new King Charles as you did for Queen Elizabeth II?
That's such a difficult question. You know, I have to honour King Charles, but at the same time, Queen Elizabeth, you know, as I said, how emotional it was to be there, just to be in that moment, to know I've seen now her in the coffin, and we'll never have a life without. Life now is going to be without the Queen, and we've never known. I haven't known life without the Queen. You haven't, and the millions of people around the world. You know, she's touched all our lives, and no one is going to be able to take that place of Queen Elizabeth II. She was a great monarch. She was amazing. She was dutiful up until the end. Even, you know, appointing, and commanding Liz Truss as Prime Minister. We're never going to know those moments of those Christmas messages that she gives. Yeah. We're going to miss all those moments, seeing her at Royal Ascot at Wimbledon. So no one's going to be able to pay the same respects that we had for the Queen as we would for King Charles. But you know, I wish King Charles the best, and in closing, if you'll allow me just to say my condolences to the royal family and King Charles for the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. May her soul rest in peace.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seshni Moodlea, with no doubt the most stylish bookcase in Milton Keynes there. And lastly, we're going to go to Brian Dugan, who is in Edinburgh. Good afternoon, Brian. Give us your reflections, if you will, on not only the life of the late Queen, but the events of the last few days as well.
Good afternoon, Beverly. Well, I think that everything has been summed up very well by the 2 previous speakers, but I think that everything that has been playing out over the past week or so demonstrates the depth of affection, the sheer wholeheartedness in what everyone is feeling throughout the country, and the fact that it goes from, you know, the lowliest right through to the highest, or the most stately, or whatever way you would wish to describe But I mean, she was a remarkable woman. I think that's the first thing that you have to say. Her longevity, I suppose, would be at the root of that, in terms of this is a woman who saw prime ministers come and go, all the way from Churchill to Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And she said that she would dedicate her life to the service of the people, to the service of the country. And I think that she carried that through in her actions. She represented the country in a manner which people can only feel an enormous amount of pride about. And I think that that's what's coming through perhaps most of all. She did represent the people. Clearly, she wasn't without fault. How could you be when you reign and are a public figure for such a long period of time? But whatever crisis she might have had to come through, and there were various crises from political right through to very personal in terms of her family, I think she always was prepared to listen, perhaps most of all. And that is the mark, I think, of any great leader. And if she did put a step wrong, which from time to time would be almost inevitable, I think that she was very adept at maybe correcting herself and the institution which she represents, therefore. But I was at Aston Villa last night, at Villa Park. Her grandson, the future king, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, is a big fan of the football club. And the minute's silence was marked impeccably by everyone in the crowd, not merely because Prince William would be an Aston Villa fan, and not merely because it was part of the whole state of the games that played out this weekend, part of the edict of the Premier League. It was very heartfelt, and it was very poignant, and it passed off in a manner which I think is being replicated in the actions of everybody throughout the country over the past week, and that will extend, of course, into Monday and beyond. She was a remarkable figure, and I think that all of this now is being shown in terms of the strength of feeling, and I think the genuineness of the feeling which is borne by all.
Lovely. Thank you, Brian. What incredible testimonies from all three of you there. Brian Dugan, one of our viewers in Edinburgh. Sometimes, honestly, our viewers make the presenters and the panellists look like we can't string a sentence together. You just say go and there they are. Thank you. And keep your views coming to me as well during the show, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, the plans for the sequence of events when the Queen died have, of course, been in place and planning for decades. But what about the simpler things which just happen organically and are beyond our control? For example, the seemingly endless supply of flowers. Well, our Northern Ireland correspondent, Dougie Beattie, has caught up with some flower wholesalers to find out more.
Most of them come from Holland. Probably 75% comes from Holland. We also bring from Africa, and we also bring from Colombia. We also bring from Italy. Basically, we bring from around the world, South America, all over.
George Crothers is the manager of one of Northern Ireland's largest flower wholesalers and explains just how tricky it has been to keep the tributes blooming.
Last week sort of caught us by surprise, obviously, because you can't really plan for something like this. A lot of our stuff has to be pre-ordered maybe 2 weeks in advance, the likes of carnations and spray carnations coming from Colombia. So we've had a very short supply of them because obviously, again, we can't plan 2 weeks in advance for a major event like this.
Even with the logistical hardship of keeping the market supplied, the price hasn't risen from 3 weeks earlier.
We sell by stem, not by bunch, really. So stem price hasn't really gone up much because of the extra demand. So really, they're not paying any more for flowers than they were last week or the week before. Just there's been more volume going out.
Inflationary pressures are there, and like so many others, costs have jumped over the last year, and that is down to one thing.
You're spanning the fridge, which has to run 24/7. So we can't just say we can't cut costs by turning the fridge off because then we lose the product. So we still have to run our fridge 24/7, which runs on electricity. So we can't just turn the plugs off. We find our own electricity bills gone from 50,000 maybe a year to £100,000 a year. And these costs, you know, what do we do? You know, where do you go?
It seems that not even the cost of living or the price at the checkout can stop many from saying goodbye.
Hopefully we'll be able to tell them in years to come that they were here and laid the flowers in memory of the Queen.
Well, I just felt it was necessary to come to pay respects to our Queen, who has served us for so many years.
To be honest, I'm here to bring my son to take a little picture, so in years to come I can look back and say, you know, you were born the year of the Queen's Jubilee and when the Queen passed away. So it's just here to pay our respects and make a few little memories.
If you're wondering what will happen to this floral carpet, well, the tributes will be removed and sent to Buckingham Palace, while the flowers will be used for compost and put on the beds in and around Hillsborough Castle. Dougie Beattie, GB News.
Thank you, Dougie. We're seeing images there from Westminster Hall where the queues continue past the Queen's coffin. I think their estimation is there will be about 700,000 people in total will get through there on that very memorable pilgrimage that so many people are undertaking. Now, different topic entirely. Ukrainian officials say that hundreds of graves have been found outside Izium. I'm going to check the pronunciation of that in a moment. Days after the town was retaken from Russia. Wooden crosses, most of them marked with numbers, were discovered in a forest outside of the town by advancing Ukrainian forces. So as Ukraine continues to take back territory, is this the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin's war? Well, I'm joined by journalist Danny Armstrong, a former Moscow correspondent. Izium, Danny, did I get that right?
Yeah, it's easy for me to say. Izium is the pronunciation. Really harrowing site that has been uncovered in Izium, around 445 bodies, including 20 to 25 Ukrainian soldiers. Now, it's important to note that this mass grave has been around since World War II. In May, some Russian forces said it was being used for the graves of Ukrainian soldiers that wouldn't be taken by the Ukrainian army. Now, what we've seen in the past few days completely refutes that. Right. We have seen civilians as well as soldiers, their corpses showing signs of torture, of their hands tied behind their back, of execution killings, of ropes around their necks, of covers over their heads. This is for civilians and soldiers as well. Really, really harrowing images. Now, Izium, from a geographical point of view, is a really important city. It's, if we take the northeastern territorial losses by the Russian army in Kharkiv, Izium is within the Kharkiv region, but is also the next major city on from Kharkiv on the way to Donbass. Now, President Putin this week has said his goal, rather limited, is to liberate the whole of the Donbass region where the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics are situated. Russian media are calling this a tactical retreat all the way back from Izium, but what we're really seeing is Ukrainian forces on their counter-offensive, gathering gathering areas of Ukraine on this counter-offensive at a faster pace than the Russians. The Russians are retreating at a faster pace than the Ukrainians can actually gather this land. So what we're seeing is in the Russian media a complete parallel to what's going on the ground in Ukraine.
Gosh, you used to work for Russia Today, didn't you?
Yes.
And then did you resign when the war started, when Putin invaded Ukraine?
I did. I resigned on an ethical ground. I didn't want to support a war from a position that I couldn't fully support ethically. And also, if a media organ is set up to work against Russophobia and anti-Russian propaganda, that's fine. And that was a big part of my job. It was something that I actively like doing, pointing out hypocrisy in US politics and UK politics as well. But when it turns out that propaganda is actually the truth, then it doesn't leave anybody a leg to stand on within that media organ. Now, just coming back to when I actually resigned, it's actually tied in with it. On February 24th, there were huge protests in Moscow, thousands of people there, also hundreds of arrests. Now, after that, people were kind of a little bit scared to go out into the streets and to show their dissent towards the war. They were threatened with fines, they were threatened with time in jail for discrediting the Russian army. What we've seen is actually dissent reappear after such things as the massacre in Bucha. Of course, that was one big one back in March. What we're seeing now here in Izum as well. There are 7 deputies who've actually written to the State Duma in St. Petersburg. Sorry, the deputies are from St. Petersburg, have written to the State Duma, St. Petersburg, of course, Vladimir Putin's hometown, calling for Vladimir Putin to be removed from office and tried for treason. The ringleaders, the 2 ringleaders of this group, have said they've been met with great support in the streets, people asking for selfies, people saying that we'll pay your legal aids to fight any fines, any prison time, and also flights to Mexico if they fancy hot foot and get out of the country.
Wow. I know you probably don't like this question. It's a bit mean of me to ask you, Danny, but do you see where this might go? Do you see what the timescale might be now? It feels this week like Ukraine have had some successes, but it is still very hard to call, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, if there's anything that's not in doubt, it's the fact that this counter-offensive by Ukraine has been hugely, hugely successful. Yeah. Russian morale is at an all-time low. It's probably why we've seen these killings in Izum, as these Russian soldiers, they arrive as the liberators of the city, the fighters against Nazism. Of course, that was a huge pretext for the war from Vladimir Putin. And then when they hear of these huge losses on the front line, these territorial losses and these casualties, they start to turn a bit nasty and obviously have a scorched earth policy to prevent anybody helping the Ukrainian war effort.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and illuminating us. It's very much slipped off the news agenda, obviously, with events here at the moment, but I imagine as of towards the end of next week, we will be talking about this and following it in much more detail. So thank you, Danny, for coming in. Now, security across London is of paramount importance ahead of the Queen's state funeral on Monday. The Metropolitan Police have said that the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth will be the biggest security operation it has ever undertaken. But in the build-up yesterday morning, 2 police officers were stabbed in Leicester Square and a man has been arrested after he approached the coffin, of course, in front of mourners in Westminster Hall. So I'm joined now by former Metropolitan Police Service Senior Investigating Officer Peter Kirkham. Hello, Peter. Nice of you to join us. The police at the moment here in London have, as they describe it, the biggest event in history. They have an enormous job to get right. It's impossible, isn't it, to overstate the significance of the resources that we will need to make this all go smoothly on Monday and before that. How do you think they're going to do? How do you think they're doing so far?
As far as I can see from the coverage that we've had in the media, things seem to be going okay so far. The Met, of course, has got a long history of dealing with all sorts of events of all sorts of scales. Yes, this might be amongst the largest, but it's very different in potential issues to lots of other things that aren't far behind it in terms of size. Things like Notting Hill Carnival, things like mass demonstrations about various things that we've seen over the years. You know, really high-profile sports events, the Olympics back in 2012. Lots and lots of things on similar scale, of different style, of different complexity, of different threat. And so the police in London are probably amongst the finest in the world in terms of their ability to deal with these sorts of things. So I don't anticipate any major problems. That said, on something on the scale of this size, things are bound to go wrong. There will be millions of interactions every day between individual police officers and individual members of the public, and some of those won't end well. People will be needing to be arrested for whatever reason. People will be needed to move on. They'll need to be told they can't do that. And whenever you've got a police officer telling someone no, then you've got a conflict situation. When you've got a conflict situation, there's potential for it to go wrong. So things will go wrong. That's inevitable, but I don't anticipate any major issues.
We were just seeing pictures just a moment ago of the new Commissioner of the Met, Sir Mark Rowley. He's only been in the job it's about 4 days, I think, isn't it, Peter? It's a lot to walk into this, isn't it?
Yes and no. Yes, he's obviously going to have a role to play in the operation. but the actual nuts and bolts of the operational order, the nuts and bolts of getting the right people in the right place at the right time with the right equipment and skills, all of that is done at a level far below that of Commissioner. The role he has is really almost a figurehead, oversight, representing the organisation in terms of presence at the funeral or whatever. And so, although he's new in the job, it will have all been happening, waiting for him to come along and sort of take control of it. So I don't think we need worry on that score.
OK. All right. Thank you, Peter. Thanks for joining us and giving us your perspective. That is Peter Kirkham, their Senior Investigating Officer. Now, more to come in the next hour. It's 1 minute after 5 o'clock on Saturday of what is now a bank holiday weekend, of course. You are with GB News on TV, online and digital radio. I am Bev Turner. Now, following the death of Her Majesty the Queen, we will continue to bring you the latest as the country comes to terms with life in Britain under a new monarch. Joining us for the show are continuing to be with me, and we're seeing some beautiful pictures. Historian and broadcaster Rafe Haydel-Mancu, beautiful pictures of Rafe as well, and royal broadcaster and photographer Helena Shard. Looking out onto London this afternoon, guys, look at that, not a cloud in the sky. We really are the best in the world at these kind of events, aren't we, Helen? That's what I've been reminded of, I think, during the last week. There is no country on earth that does this sort of pageantry like we do.
We don't. We are brilliant at it. We are fantastic. And I think, you know, we talk about Her Majesty and the royal family being stoked, but I think we all are. It's so polite. There's been very, very little upset, really, in the last few days. And people are, you know, people are in different clothing. It was freezing the other night and people were in shorts and not really too many complaints,
No.
I would say.
As a photographer, are you watching a lot of this and thinking, oh, I wish I could get out there with my camera and capture these moments?
Yes, I think that all the time, but I'd have to clone myself. I'd have to.
What do you think at the moment? I mean, in terms of thinking about the images we've seen, what do you think will be the most iconic moments from the last few days?
Oh, gosh, there's loads.
I know that's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I love the human nature, you know, of meeting people and hearing people's stories and the camaraderie and people just all getting on well. So catching those shots is great. I mean, obviously having, you know, King Charles and Prince of Wales, you know, shaking hands with people and talking to people, and that unification also is brilliant. But I'm thinking about as well, like, you know, tonight with the grandchildren, standing vigil. I mean, that's going to be fabulous.
Yes.
And thinking about them in costume and.
The grandchildren as opposed to the great-grandchildren, to be clear, because it's sort of easy to forget that sometimes I also fall over it. You think of the Queen's grandchildren, we start to think of the little ones because, of course, they're adult grandchildren, aren't they? So who will be there this evening, this afternoon, Rafe? Remind us who will be standing at the vigil.
So the Queen's 8 grandchildren will be standing vigil. We'll have Prince William, Prince of Wales and Prince Harry in uniform. Prince William at the head of the coffin, flanked on either side by his cousins Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall. Prince Harry will be flanked by Princess Eugenie and Beatrice, the children of the Duke of York. And then in between them both, on both sides, you will have, either side of the coffin, Lady Louise Windsor and Viscount Severn, the 2 children of Prince Edward.
Yeah. But no partners tonight, no wives, no husbands?
No wives, no partners, just as it was yesterday when you had the vigil of the princes with the Queen's 4 children. But on the balcony, the royal family assembled yesterday to watch the vigil, which is only for 15 minutes. And I would imagine perhaps that will be the occasion for the royal family to gather once again this evening to watch that.
Can I ask you the same question, Rafe, about iconic images? Obviously, we have so much more to come over the next few days, and particularly Monday will be a visual feast. It genuinely, you know, when you see these pictures from Westminster Hall, the colour, the riot of colour in the flags and the the uniforms of the military personnel in attendance. I mean, you know, my children who've never really seen anything like this, and why has that man got those funny feathers on his hat, Mummy? I mean, it does look, through the eyes of children, it does look vaguely ludicrous, some of the outfits, but they are beautiful, aren't they?
Yes, well, as you were saying, no one does ceremony better than we do. The Austrian Empire comes quite close. When the Archduke of Austria died a few years ago, even though there wasn't a monarchy there, you saw something close to what we have, but it wasn't still quite the same. It is very special what we do. It is unique. And certainly, for me, I mean, the iconic image for any state funeral is the Vigil of the Princes, usually the lying in state. But for me, actually, it's going to be Edinburgh. It's going to be seeing... We're so used to the set pieces of London. Every time there's a royal event, it's always Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey and the Mall. Finally, we got to see a different side to the monarchy, the Scottish monarchy in action. And those romantic scenes of Holyrood House Palace, of the Royal Mile, of St Giles Cathedral, of the Scottish Heralds and the Royal Company of Archers, that to me will be the enduring image.
Yeah, I think as well, the image that was so stunning to us, and I know that a lot of our viewers felt the same way, there was apparently a palpable intake of breath at the time, which was when William and Harry, with Meghan and Kate, appeared for the first time. And we didn't expect to see that, did we? We didn't expect to see them collaborating in that way. Do you have any faith, Helena, that this is the start of the bridge being built between the families, or will it very much depend on whatever is in Harry's book if he still publishes it?
Yeah, I have faith. I really do have faith. And we need it. We so need it for our monarchy, for our world at the moment. I mean, it's fractured. And I think in order for the monarchy to keep going successfully, you know, there has to be some give. And I remember saying in another interview, even if it's something that's not from the heart, it's a visual thing that you could see even in a photograph that they're trying. And that's what's happening, you know, small steps. And I think it's definitely gonna get there.
One of our viewers has got in touch saying, Ross, thank you, Ross, for your message, saying, the King is a man of the public. I love seeing him out and about. Do you think that was the impression that people had of Prince Charles, Rafe, before he became king? I'm not sure people did really see him as a man of the public, did they?
Well, I would hope so. It's very difficult to know exactly how the public regards the king, because there's been so much misinformation. There's been so much sort of different courts giving views on different sides of him, but he's always shown that side, you know, and that's why he's got, you know, all these local interests that he has, but be it Poundbury Village and in Scotland. He does so much to actually try to improve the lot of working people on his estates. He's always engaging with people. A lot of it, you look at the Prince's Trust, what's happened there, and all of the initiatives for the young, for homeless people, his interfaith dialogue, outreach. He's just so engaged with communities that it's hard to think of him being a distant figure.
What do you think, Helena, of the fact that Prince Charles has given, King Charles has given special dispensation now to Andrew and the Duke of York to wear their military outfits on Monday? I was
wavery to begin with, but obviously I think Prince Andrew was given dispensation to begin with, and to refuse Prince Harry, I think, would be wrong. And people want to see it, you know. I think Prince Harry was quite magnanimous, really, in his thoughts about it. But, you know, he has served in Afghanistan 2 tournaments, I think. And, you know, it's a special time, isn't it?
See, I'm being a little bit more cynical, Rafe, about it. And I wonder if it's because it is such a symbol. When they are walking on Monday, to have those two in mourning suits rather than their military outfits, you're going to have commentators on every TV station all around the world pointing out why. And maybe Prince Charles decided that he would rather avoid that.
They will be in mourning. They won't be wearing uniforms. The uniforms are for the vigil at the the princes. So you'll see William and Harry today. The only 2 of the grandchildren wearing uniforms will be Harry and William. But you're not going to see at the funeral Prince Harry or the Duke of York wearing uniforms.
Is that right? So okay. This is why you're here, Rafe, because you know the stuff that I don't, and it does feel like it's been changing by the hour. So just explain.
I think it got unnecessarily confusing, and we've had this sort of mini drama, unfortunately and unnecessarily. The original edict that came down was that only working royals would be wearing uniforms. Then we had this curious dispensation for the Duke of York to wear a uniform at the vigil yesterday, because he's still a Vice Admiral of the Fleet. And that made it look odd that Harry didn't have that same dispensation. Yeah. Now, some might say it would have been easier just to keep that simple blanket rule down and not make that concession for the Duke of York, and then everything would have been simple. But it did look a bit odd to have that sort of loophole for him there. Personally, I would have preferred just to have had the rule for working royals much more simple and straightforward and easy. But we have the situation that we have.
And so just so that I am completely clear, so on Monday at the funeral, William will be in his military uniform because even though he's no longer a member of the services, because he's a working royal, he can still wear his outfit. Yes, and also you have to remember that members of the royal family are also colonels of regiments. Right.
So they have military functions, even though he's not serving. To wear uniform, normally you have to be a serving officer, of which neither Prince Andrew nor Prince Harry are serving officers at the moment.
Got it.
Whereas the royals have these positions as colonels of their regiments.
Got it. Brilliant. Thank you, Rafe. As I say, every moment at the moment is every day is a lesson. Now, waiting times are expected to be about 16 hours for those paying tribute to the Queen. Our GB News South West of England reporter Jeff Moody has been in the queue since about 9 o'clock this morning. Jeff, where are you now?
I'm outside the South Bank. I'm on the South Bank, outside the National Theatre, so we're making progress. It is quite slow progress, and we've been going since 9:30 this morning. So what's that, 6 hours, 7 hours? I can't even work it out. I'm so tired. Everyone's complaining of a bad back. People aren't saying that their feet are hurting, but people's backs are hurting, which is a slight issue. I was moaning earlier on about the lack of food, the fact that there weren't any sort of burger stalls and stands on the way. I'm eating my words because there was a whole row of vans just along here with everything you can possibly imagine. So people have stopped and they've eaten something. They've also been buying a little bit of booze. There's quite a few people who have got, Prosecco and wine, and they're filling up their glasses and offering them around. So I think everyone's at that point where they need a little bit of sustenance. We've had a slight bit of bad news here because we were told right back at Tower Bridge, which was about 2 hours ago, we were told that we had 5 hours to go. And we thought, great, we can do 5 hours. We've now just been told that we've got 6 hours to go from this point. I mean, I don't know how accurate that is, but people didn't react too well because, everyone's now starting to get a bit tired, and we thought we were kind of near the end. I mean, we should be able to see Big Ben at Westminster fairly shortly, and that will be, I think that'll be good for people's morale to sort of almost see that the end is in sight. But of course, we do know that when we cross Lambeth Bridge, that's where all the zigzag queues go, so we've still got a long wait there. We've got screens along the Thames that are showing pictures of the Queen from years ago. There's some beautiful black and white images that are being shown on the screen, and people are sort of having a little stop to look at that. Still a good atmosphere, still everyone enjoying themselves, especially now people are having a slight drink. I'm not going to have anything to drink because it's been a very long day and I want to make the very most of it. Back to you for now.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff there, not yet moody, but he might be. I think the cameraman might have just had a little tumble. Right, let's talk to our panel now for a little while. What we're seeing down there, there's no sign of the enthusiasm, despite the fact that Jeff is acknowledging it was getting quite tiring. There's a few bad backs. There will be this enthusiasm. Do you think we will see this continued throughout the weekend? Because obviously, do we know at the moment, Rafe, when the door will close on Westminster Hall before the funeral to the public? Do we know when the...
6:30 in the morning, on the day of the funeral, on Monday morning it will close. So they have to calculate exactly how long it will take for people to get in terms of deciding. So we would imagine that they'll be closing the gate sometime Sunday afternoon, early evening at the latest, I would imagine.
Right. And then what will happen then Monday morning? Tell us the process, the order of service, effectively, of what's going to happen on Monday.
So the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards will lift the coffin off of the catafalque, where you now see it resting, with the processional cross of Westminster Abbey ahead of it, and that will be processed with it as it makes its way from Westminster Hall, the short distance just across the road to Westminster Abbey. So don't expect there to be a long procession before the funeral, because these two buildings are literally almost within arm's reach of each other. But it'll be going down through the west door, and at 11 a.m. the funeral will start for Her late Majesty the Queen, with 2,000 guests and dignitaries that will be there. It will last for around an hour, and then at around 12 o'clock there will be the final funeral procession. And this is an occasion, really, if you want to see the coffin and you haven't been lucky enough to get into the queue, this will be your opportunity. It will more or less follow the route that it took to come into Westminster Hall, but it will carry on to Hyde Park Corner, to what's called Wellington Arch. And at Wellington Arch, the coffin will be transferred to a hearse, and from there, they've deliberately taken a route that will give people a great opportunity to line the streets all the way from Hyde Park Corner to Windsor Castle to view the coffin.
And it will go quite near my house, and I will pop out onto the road to have a little look. OK, now we've also got GBNews political correspondent Tom Harwood, who's joining us live from Westminster. Hi, Tom. What's happening down there?
Well, Bev, I've got to tell you, the queues are dominating the Westminster scene here, as they have been doing for the last few days. It's not just the main queue, that 5-mile stretch from Parliament right around the South Bank, as Jeff has been talking about, all the way across to Southwark Park, right the way across the length of central London. There's also another queue, a disabilities queue that goes down along the North Bank past to the Tate Britain. But that's what's dominating the atmosphere in Westminster at the moment, although I have to say MPs will be returning to work pretty much as soon as the funeral is over. There's business to be done, of course. The country is facing so many different problems. There's a war in Europe, there's sky-high inflation in the UK and Europe and in the United States of America. Of course, there are cost of living issues attached to that. The energy crisis, how that will be settled for businesses, is still a bit of an open question. Will there need to be extra legislation passed in these few days that Parliament has to sit before party conference recess? And of course, there's international issues too. The UN General Assembly is sitting next week in New York. That is going to be Liz Truss's first international trip as Prime Minister, although potentially she'll get a bit of a flavour of international affairs as Prime Minister a few days before then, as the world's great and good, the heads of state, the kings and queens, the presidents and prime ministers from all around the world descend on London tomorrow and the day after. It's a very busy political calendar. Of course, it feels like much more than a week ago that it was, or at least it feels like months rather than just last week, that it was that we had a new Prime Minister installed, that we had that big energy announcement in the House of Commons, of course, so disrupted just a couple of hours later by the terrible news of the passing of Her late Majesty. This has really upended the plan for the Truss administration, for the Truss government. This new team in Number 10 wanted to hit the ground running with a series of announcements, not just on energy, but on tax as well, and on many other things. They wanted to be seen to be a government that was doing things, that was getting spades in the ground. The game plan, so we hear of this government, was to have 1 year of delivery this year, and then 1 year gearing up to that 2024 general election, because of course this new government does not have much time to make its mark, and due to recent events it has even less time. So we're expecting potentially a mini budget, a fiscal statement at the end of next week after the Prime Minister returns from New York. In New York, by the way, she'll be meeting with the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden. That has been announced today. There's a bilateral meeting we expect on Wednesday. But of course, after that, party conferences, first Labour and then Conservative, and potentially a shortening, a curtailing, a truncation of that party conference recess for more business to be done in the second week of October. There is so much to do that this government must get done in terms of legislation, in terms of announcements too, and relatively little parliamentary time.
OK, thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Oh, I think we're staying with you, Tom, for just a moment. I was thinking of you this morning, Tom, when we saw the footage of King Charles and Prince William down at the queue, shaking hands with the crowd. I think it was exactly the point that you were at for GB News yesterday. Were you watching that and just wishing so much that you were you were down there to be up close with the new king?
Do you know what? I felt like I missed out on that a little bit less than my parents, who travelled to London last night. They queued from around 10 p.m. last night and managed to get into Westminster Hall at around 11 a.m. this morning. They got into Westminster Hall just around half an hour before the new King and the new Prince of Wales greeted the crowd. And I have to say, I went for a bit of a brunch with my parents, and they were a little bit disappointed that they'd missed the King and the Prince of Wales. But clearly, what a lift for the crowd there. Speaking to so many people who had been queuing for the last 3 days, it does feel like you're very close there, but some people are running down on energy at that point. Still an hour or two to go, but so close in sight. Clearly, a visit from the King like that will have lifted the moods of those people, will have given them the energy to go on and felt like they were appreciated. And I think this is something we've actually seen from this King in the last week or so. Of course, when he came down from Balmoral for the first time, driving towards Buckingham Palace, before he entered Buckingham Palace as King, he got out of his car and he met those crowds and he took the time to shake the hands of the people before he even entered his royal palace. And I think that is something that we're going to see a lot more of from this monarchy, wanting to get there in with the people, shaking hands and really being seen to be a more visible monarchy than we've had the chance to have in the last few years, perhaps for obvious reasons. A slightly younger monarchy can be a slightly more active monarchy, and clearly we are going to see as well this tour of the nations from the King. He's already been, of course, to Edinburgh, to Belfast and to Cardiff, but we're going to see more of that in the months to come, and potentially as well reaching out to those Commonwealth realms too. It might not be long before we see senior royals going off to the other parts, those other countries that the monarchy remains head of state at, making sure that everyone is taking part in this moment in history.
We're going to see, obviously, the political leaders from around the world, Tom, descending on London in the next couple of days. I believe that American President Joe Biden will arrive in London this evening. How much information are the press being given? How much are the correspondents, such as yourself, being given in terms of the whereabouts, the movements of the dignitaries, the presidents, the prime ministers that will arrive here?
We're not being given operational directions for security reasons. However, we do know that there are a number of meetings to happen, informal meetings rather than formal bilaterals as they're called, between the Prime Minister and various leaders of some countries. The Prime Minister will at Chequers meet the Prime Minister of Australia and the Prime Minister of New Zealand. That's expected to be tomorrow. There had been plans for an informal meeting with the President of the United States tomorrow. That has now been delayed and really beefed up to some extent to be a formal bilateral meeting in New York next week, as opposed to a more brief and perhaps more sombre meeting dominated, of course, by the funeral rather than great businesses of state and potentially foreign affairs as well. What with war in Europe, sometimes it might feel like it's an inappropriate thing to be speaking about before the funeral. But we do know some of these informal meetings between the Prime Minister and other presidents and prime ministers around the world have been planned, although not the big set-piece bilaterals that sometimes we expect at summits. But yes, of course, we'll be seeing many dozens of world leaders, of presidents, prime ministers, kings and queens, even the Emperor of Japan coming here to the United Kingdom in the next 2 days. It will be a really gargantuan security operation for the Metropolitan Police and for the Secret Services as well, making sure that things can run smoothly as Westminster Abbey, that grand church in the heart of the decision-making part of London, becomes the centre of global governance for a few hours on Monday morning.
Thank you, Tom. Well done, Tom Harwood there down at Westminster. And thank you for bearing with us when we have that tortuously awkward, it's about 5-second delay down to Westminster from here, but I'm afraid there's nothing we can do about that. Now, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie have released a statement, and it reads, "Our dearest Granny, we've not been able to put much into words since you left us all. There have been tears and laughter, silences and chatter, hugs and loneliness, and a collective loss for you, our beloved Queen and our beloved Granny. We, like many, thought you'd be here forever, and we all miss you terribly. You were our matriarch, our guide, our loving hand on our backs, leading us through this world. You taught us so much, and we will cherish those lessons and memories forever. For now, dear Granny, all we want to say is thank you. Thank you for making us laugh, for including us, for picking heather and raspberries, for marching soldiers, for our teas, for comfort, for joy. You, being you, will never know the impact you have had on our family and so many people around the world. The world mourns you, and the tributes would really make you smile. They are all too true of the remarkable leader you are. We're so happy you're back with Grandpa. Goodbye, dear Granny. It has been the honour of our lives to have been your granddaughters, and we're so very proud of you. We know that dear Uncle Charles, the King, will continue to lead in your example, as he too has dedicated his life to service. God save the King. With our love, Beatrice and Eugenie." Helen, it's beautiful, that, isn't it?
Very sweet, very sweet, very emotional.
I like the detail, picking, was it raspberries and heather? I love that they've brought that little bit of humanity into it. Rafe?
Yes, very sentimental. It's funny how all of these statements come from the heart, but they've all got a slightly different feel to them.
Yeah.
And if I read that, not knowing who it was from, I would have guessed Beatrice and Eugenie, or at least two ladies wrote that, you know? Yeah. You got that feeling from it. Also interesting to note how these are all being staggered by precedents. We had firstly the statement from the King, then we had from Prince William, then we had from the Princess Royal, then from the Earl of Wessex. We're not getting one from the Duke of York, so instead we get his two daughters. It's just interesting how that's also happening.
So you think that's deliberate?
Yes, undoubtedly, yeah. It would be wrong for Beatrice and Eugenie to make their statement before, say, Prince William.
Oh, I see what you mean. So will we have any more statements to come, do you think?
Conceivably, there could be an opportunity for some of the other grandchildren to do so. I don't think so. I'm not sure. But
great-grandchildren?
Well, they'll be a bit young to have...
Well, would they? No, hang on a minute. How old's the eldest? How old, Louis?
Yes,
no, he's the littlest.
They don't have... Well, again, I think everything's being handled for by the parents.
George, I mean, don't I? So George could probably have done a little statement. He's a bit young for that.
I think a bit young.
Yeah, probably. I just quite like to see it. I like those. I like those sort of warm, I like the warm family insight into that. The way, you know, the fact that they said the way you guided us, that's real insight into their relationship, isn't it? Anyway, OK, the funeral for the Queen, Britain's longest reigning monarch, takes place, of course, on Monday. You all know that by now. It's going to be a day of emotion and sadness, but also a celebration of the monarch's life and 70-year reign. Thousands of people are expected to line the streets in London, as well as Windsor, of course, to pay their respects as she makes her final journey. Now, someone who's going to be at the event is former Sergeant for the Irish Guards, Alan McNeely, and he joins me now. Hello, Alan. Thank you for joining us. How does this work with an invitation to an event like this? How were you notified, and what did they tell you?
There's a miscommunication there somewhere, Beverly. I'm just attending the funeral as a normal member of the public. I'm not an invited guest or anything like that. So I'll be making my way down on Monday and joining everyone else.
I see. OK, that makes you no less important. I can tell you that. So what are you going to do on Monday? Do you know where are you going to be?
Well, hopefully, if the trains run well from Lincolnshire, I'll get down to London around about 9:30. Then it'll be a case of deciding which is the best option to go for. It would be nice to be at Westminster and Westminster Abbey for the service, to listen to the service. And if not, then I'll probably make my way up to the Mall to find a suitable point where I can sort of say my farewells.
So we're seeing some photographs of you, Alan, when you were in the Irish Guards. What does it mean to soldiers to be acting, working in the name of the monarch? And so, therefore, what did the Queen mean to you?
Well, the Queen is totally central to the military. And again, she's central to the whole democratic structure of our country, or the monarch is. So you serve for Queen and country, although you might fight for your mates. So, but the Queen is obviously the head of every, the Colonel-in-Chief of most regiments. She's the commander, really, of the British Army, if you want to put it like that, the Navy and the Air Force. So she's the boss, as I'm sure you've heard people say. We talk about the firm and the boss, and that's who you serve. But that's integrated throughout your military career because it's in the uniforms that you wear, it's on the cap badges that you have, it's in the procedures, the protocols, and the duties that you perform.
Well, we hope you have a moving, a poignant day on Monday, Alan. Maybe we can speak to you after you've attended the event, and you can let us know how it was. Thank you so much, Alan McNeely there, former Sergeant of the Irish Guards. You're watching and listening to Bev Turner here on GB News. It is 5:31. Today is the third full day that the Queen is lying in state in Westminster Hall. We'll be bringing you all the latest, but right now, let's get the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Good afternoon. The latest from the GB newsroom. The King and Prince of Wales have made a surprise visit to greeting people in the queue to see the Queen lying in state. Hundreds of people cheered as King Charles arrived to speak to those who've been waiting in line in South London. They've offered their condolences to the King and Prince William, who thanked the crowd for standing in the cold throughout the night to pay their respects to the late monarch. The Prince of Wales could be heard asking them how long they'd been waiting for. The government website currently suggests the wait time is 11 hours. The Met Police says it's honoured to have hosted the King and Prince William after they visited the Special Operations Room. King Charles was greeted by the new Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, the Home Secretary and the London Mayor. Both he and Prince William thanked emergency service staff for their work during the period of mourning. The security operation for the state funeral on Monday is set to be the biggest in the Met Police Force's history. Sadiq Khan's praised those taking part.
I want to thank the police from around the country, the armed forces personnel, the medics, the volunteers, the stewards, and many, many more people who've been working really hard over years. But I've seen civil servants and others working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, making sure everything is ready.
Later today, Queen Elizabeth's grandchildren will stand guard around her coffin in Westminster Hall. Last night, the late monarch's children, King Charles, the Princess Royal, Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex, held their own 15-minute vigil, honouring their mother. Prince Harry has been given special dispensation by his father to wear his military uniform, despite no longer being a working royal. Prince Andrew had been given the same permission. World leaders have started arriving ahead of the state funeral, with around 500 dignitaries expected to attend. A number have visited Westminster Hall to pay their respects, including the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern also attended the Queen's lying in state, as well as the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are now on their way to the UK, leaving the States on Air Force One a short while ago. Rehearsals for the funeral were held in Windsor in the early hours of this morning, with the procession moving down the long walk towards the castle gates. Royal Pageant Master Bruno Peake says a lot of planning has gone into the event.
Rehearsal side is the element that will 99.9% guarantee that you will have a successful event. And again, these guys and these ladies who are actually taking part, well, in the military, this will be such a proud moment for them. So they're going to be making sure that they don't put a step wrong.
In other news, Ukraine says the mass grave discovered in the eastern city of Izium is proof of Russia's war crimes. More than 450 bodies, most of them civilians, were found, some with their hands tied behind their backs. The city was recently liberated after 6 months of Russian occupation. The Kremlin denies it's targeting civilians or committing war crimes. One of 2 police officers stabbed in central London yesterday has been discharged from hospital. She was stabbed in the arm in Leicester Square at around 6 o'clock in the morning. Another officer, who was stabbed 3 times in the neck and once in the chest, is still in hospital, but his injuries aren't said to be life-threatening. A 24-year-old man was arrested and remains in custody. Police are renewing their appeal for witnesses. Protesters have been demonstrating outside Scotland Yard over the fatal shooting of Chris Cabba. The 24-year-old was killed by an armed officer following a police pursuit in South London 2 weeks ago. Chants of "No justice, no peace" and "No racist police" were heard during the protest. It comes as police investigators consider whether race was a factor in the shooting. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Thank you for staying with us. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner on GB News TV, online and digital radio. Now, following the death of Her Majesty the Queen, we're going to continue to bring you all the latest as the country comes to terms with life in Britain under a new monarch. So let's hear some thoughts and feelings about the late Queen from our very own GB News viewer. So let's start with Lee Harris, who is joining us from Bristol. Hello, Lee.
Hi, Bev.
Why did you feel the need to want to come on the TV and talk to us from the heart in this very historic moment?
Well, I think you've partly given the reason. I think it is a very historic moment. I was, probably like quite a lot of people, very sad when I heard the news. I'll be honest, I was surprised, probably like many others, that I felt a personal sense of loss. The Queen seemed timeless, and she's always been there, and it felt like she would go on forever. When I was growing up, my immediate family were never huge royalists, although as children, we would often watch the Queen's speech, and my gran absolutely loves the Queen. But as I've got older, I've learned how important the royal family are, what the Queen represents, and the vital role that she plays being our head of state. I genuinely love the fact that she's always been politically neutral, and I hope King Charles follows in her footsteps, which I think he will. But to be honest, the Queen's lifelong selfless commitment to her country has been, nothing but truly remarkable. And I have nothing but admiration and respect for her. She will be missed.
Do you think we will eventually, some people overnight, have the same affection and warmth towards King Charles as we feel for the Queen?
I hope so. You have to reserve a little bit of judgment, but there is. I've been so amazed by the outpouring of grief, and not just from this country, but from all over the world. I think a lot of that will continue on with King Charles. I hope it does, and I think we should give him the benefit of the doubt. I've not liked his interference in the past with certain things, like in climate change, but he has made a promise, like the Queen did, to behave himself and keep his counsel. So I think so. I think I'm willing to give him the chance, and I think he's going to do it. I think he'll be okay.
It is an epoch change. Like this is a moment in time where things will never be the same again for us. I think we also on Monday should be looking and celebrating the amazing life of the Queen, to live to 96 years old, to live a life of such purpose, working until the end, evenly. Almost right until the end. I'm going to move on to Julie now. Lee, thank you. Julie, just carrying on from what I was saying, Julie Ford in Bedfordshire, from what I was saying there, what are your memories of the Queen when you look back on her life? What has she meant to you?
Yeah, I mean, I really do echo everything that Lee's already said, and pretty much took the words out of my mouth, to be honest with you. But the Queen's always been a part of my life. Again, my family weren't huge royalists, but it was something that's always been part of my history. Again, the Queen's speech at Christmas, watching the royal weddings. It's always been something that's there, and suddenly the Queen not being there, it does feel like you've lost somebody personal to you. I've never met the Queen, I never had that privilege, but it does certainly feel like I've lost a part of my own history. But again, I feel that Charles will step up to the plate and do what he needs to do. And I genuinely hope that there will be a generation that feel the same about him that we have felt about our Queen as well.
Yeah. And what about the younger royals, Julie? I love watching Prince William and Catherine, his wife. I could watch them all the time. They do operate with such grace and dignity, don't they? They just look fantastic. They are warm. They are welcoming to the public. I think the royal family's in very safe hands, actually, with them at the helm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think Prince William and Princess Catherine, I think, are really the epitome of sort of like the Disney prince and princess, really. Again, it's elegance, it's the sophistication that brings with it, and also the grace that they hold. No matter what's going on around them, they just seem to be able to just hold their heads up high and get on with what they need to get on with without bringing too much emotion into it. And I think that brings a calmness to anybody that they're around. And I think should William get to the point of being king, which he will in however many years' time it is, I think that will carry on in his reign as well, and hopefully prove to everybody else that he will be an amazing king following in his father's footsteps.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much. I love talking to our viewers. As I said before, they're just brilliant, aren't they? They put the panellists to shame sometimes, and the presenters. Thank you both very much for joining us. Now, change of topic, Ukraine again. Now, Ukraine have said that hundreds of graves have been found outside Izium days after the town was retaken from Russia. Wooden crosses, most of them marked with numbers, were discovered in a forest outside of the town by advancing Ukrainian forces. As Ukraine continues to take back territory, is this the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin's war? It's a big question, but we have to consider it. I'm joined now by Senior Consulting Fellow of Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House, Keir Giles. Hello, Keir. So I'll start with that question. Does this signal the end of Putin's advances upon Ukraine, or is it just too early to say that?
Well, it's certainly not the end of the war, but it is yet another turning point in the war. And each time this war has entered a new phase, it's been as a result of Ukraine demonstrating some strength or some capacity that hadn't previously been suspected. Those have been the surprises all along, that Ukraine can, in fact, fight back and could liberate its occupied territories as well. Now, the problem for Putin, of course, is that this becomes harder and harder to explain at home. Russian propaganda is still selling this not even as a war, as a special military operation, and it's supposed to be going well. But that just gets harder and harder to reconcile with the reality that's coming back from Ukraine that more and more people are aware of. That's what causes Putin a serious problem, because at some point he has to either go all in and declare this is a war, mobilize the country to fight it, which of course is a declaration of failure because the special military operation didn't work out, or he has to back down in some other way to salvage the situation.
And do we know at the moment, I spoke to a Ukrainian journalist, or a journalist who specialises in Ukraine and Russian issues just earlier. These findings in Izium, does this denote war crimes categorically? And if so, what action could be taken against Putin for that?
Well, there are very specific definitions of what constitutes a war crime, but that really isn't the point here. What it is further demonstration of the fact that Ukrainians in the occupied territories have been living under a brutal and savage rule with arbitrary murder, which was not unexpected, unfortunately. We knew that this would happen. We knew that this would be discovered, not only because of what was uncovered after the Russians retreated from the north of Ukraine in places like Bucha, but also because this is typically the way the Russian military military and occupation forces operate. Right at the very earliest stages of the conflict, when colleagues and I at the think tank Chatham House were discussing what help Ukraine needed, close to the top of the list was investigators, was legal support to try to prosecute war crimes, because we knew that this was absolutely inevitable, because this is just what Russia does. The sad truth is we are going to see more and more of this as more of those occupied territories are liberated by the Ukrainian forces.
Right. Do you have any optimism that we're going to see the end of this conflict by the end of this year, Keir? Or is it inevitably going to go into 2023?
I think it is extremely hard to predict just how long this is going to last, because it would be very surprising if Ukraine could keep up this pace of advance, which to a large extent has depended not on their own capabilities, but the fact that Russia had stripped away forces from those northern areas that they've now liberated. Now, there's an assessment now that Russia will actually dig in and resist more strongly in those areas that Ukraine has not actually pushed forward and liberated yet, so you would expect progress to slow. There are plenty of good reasons why Ukraine would want this conflict to be over before the end of the year. Not least, we still have winter ahead of us with those enormously high gas and energy prices that have been triggered by Putin's energy blackmail against Europe. But we shouldn't rely on that happening, and we shouldn't rely on that same amazing pace of advance to be continuing.
Thank you very much. It's a fast-moving news day here down in Westminster as well. That was Keir Giles from Chatham House. This we are seeing here now, this is live pictures of the motorcade. I'm not quite sure where that is. We believe it is the Queen's children, the Queen's grandchildren entering Westminster Hall. Would that be right, Rafe? It's about that time, isn't it?
That's right. I think this is New Palace Yard we're looking at.
OK, so tell us who will be in those cars then.
So we're going to have the Queen's 8 grandchildren, Prince William and Prince Harry, both of whom will be in uniform, and then their 6 cousins, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, children of Princess Anne, and then also Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, from whom we've just had a statement, the daughters of the Duke of York, and also Lady Louise Windsor and James Viscount Severn, the 2 children of Prince Edward. There we go. Well, and they'll all be forming a vigil around the coffin in Westminster Hall. First time we're seeing this done, reflecting very much the Prince's vigil that was held yesterday with the 4 children of the Queen.
And we think that there may still be a little more confusion about whether Prince Harry, when he is going to be allowed to wear his military uniform. Am I right? This is the point at which, Rafe, I say I might have got it right and you might have got it wrong.
Yes, well, I'm not confused about it. So where this confusion lies, I'm not quite sure. But yes, he will be wearing uniform today when the vigil is mounted, just as the Duke of York wore his uniform of a Vice Admiral of the Fleet yesterday. But when we come to the state funeral, then we will see the Duke of York in mourning dress, as we already saw him wear when we had the earlier procession. And he'll be joined by Prince Harry and Prince William, of which only Prince William will be wearing uniform.
OK, super. We're going to stay on these images for now at Westminster Hall. People continuing to walk through. We have Jeff Moody will be appearing at some point, our reporter who's been queuing since about 9:30 this morning. He will be getting there in the next few hours, I think. Just remind us what we're looking at.
So here we see that the coffin of the Queen with the Royal Standard of England draped upon it, and the great Wanamaker Cross, one of the 4 processional crosses of Westminster Abbey, at the coffin, on top of which is the Imperial State Crown, the crown that's worn once a year by the Sovereign for the state opening of Parliament, and is also worn at the coronation. And we're also going to have the orb and sceptre also will be aboard the coffin, symbolising the spiritual and temporal power of the sovereign. And around the coffin, the vigil is being performed 24 hours a day by the King's Bodyguard, formerly the Queen's Bodyguard, different units. We have the Yeomen of the Guard, the Beefeaters, as they're often called. We have the Royal Company of Archers, the Scottish Bodyguard to the Sovereign, who, of course, played such an important role in Edinburgh. And as well as that, we've got a rotation between some of the Household Cavalry and the Honourable Corps of the Gentlemen at Arms, who are similar to Chelsea pensioners, but they're based at Windsor, and they're the ones with those dragoon uniforms with the elegant ostrich plumes.
we know, Helena, when I'm watching these images this week, I've been marvelling at the incredible uniforms worn by the military and by the men in attendance. Do we know where they're normally kept? Where are those outfits normally kept? Do we know?
Well,
ceremonial.
Eden Ravenscroft famously keep the robes of the peers, and they are the ones who often are involved in maintaining some of the other ceremonial robes that we'll be seeing, heralds, tabards, and so forth. But for the ceremonial garb will be kept in the barracks for the different regiments themselves.
Right. Okay. See, people are very emotional.
They are.
Young girl
Crying,
weeping
eyes,
there.
like more than weeping, really crying. Gosh.
Yeah, really crying. It's silent in there, I think, isn't it? You might expect that there might be some classical music, perhaps possibly playing in the background, but it is completely silent.
What's so striking about this is that Westminster Hall, anyone who's been to Westminster Hall will know that it's a cavernous place that echoes with the chatter of so much hustle and bustle that goes on there as MPs and peers meet their guests and clients and so forth. But yet, on this one occasion of state lying, it's completely silent. And history hangs heavy in that room on a normal day. But on days like this, you can feel the weight of history and you feel as if you are participating in yet another chapter in that 1,000-year history. It's quite remarkable. And here we see the Honourable Corps of the Gentlemen-at-Arms, who are the King's personal bodyguard, who are stationed permanently at Windsor Castle. And behind them we have, I think today we have the Coldstream Guards, one of the household division. And behind them we have the Yeomen of the Guard, not to be confused with the Yeoman Warders at the Tower of London. But the Honourable Corps in front and the Beefeaters, they go back to King Henry VIII's time. They were both formed over 500 years ago, two of the world's oldest regiments. And they mount the watch for 6 hours, but every 20 minutes there is a relief of the actual soldiers who are on vigil, and you have to spare a thought for these chaps with the plumes because, you know, they're probably about 70 or 80 years of age, so that's perhaps why they're being changed so quickly and frequently.
Yes, the people that my children call the men in the funny hats, Mummy. We've got Peter Blexley who's joined us in the studio, former Scotland Yard detective. Good afternoon, Peter.
Hello.
Lovely to see you in person. I'm normally talking to you down the line when you're on GB News. It's nice to see you in the studio. You're watching these momentous images with us. But as a former police officer, when you see this, are you looking at it through the prism of the security considerations?
Always.
Yeah, I bet.
Always. Vigilance, discipline, standards. And we're seeing those exhibited on a daily, hourly basis, not only by the police, but of course, here predominantly, the military.
And who will be taking responsibility today on a very basic level? Who is responsible for the security in that building?
It is a joint command, of course. Everybody that has responsibility for security in the palaces of Westminster, it's predominantly the police on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
It's the armed police officers that you see around the House of Commons and the House of Lords and Westminster Hall during normal working days. So that will not have been surrendered or handed over to anybody else. They will have the primary lead on it. And of course, they will coordinate with all the other units and regiments that are taking part in this very unusual set of circumstances.
It's, you know, it's funny, isn't it? Because in some ways, this feels like it belongs to another time. This many members of the public being allowed into such a special occasion, such a place of high security, Westminster Hall. But isn't it wonderful that we're still able to do this? I feel like maybe in several decades we'll look back and we'll say, I can't believe they used to let the public into an occasion like this. And yet the security so far, apart from that one idiot yesterday who I think tried to move towards the coffin, has been impeccable.
Yes, it has, but of course, everybody involved in this operation, which is of course operating 24 hours a day, is on absolute red alert against any potential threat, not only at the palaces of Westminster, but throughout the route, which stretches back so many miles, where so many thousands of people are queuing, across wider Westminster and all the other buildings of relevance and great importance to the functioning of government. The scale of this overall security operation around all the events, and of course the funeral on Monday, is absolutely vast. And I have a saying about it, that it stretches from the sewers to the skies, because it does. And so much of it is unseen, won't be heard of, and I'm not about to spill any secrets here, of course, because that would be, frankly, a daft thing to do. But believe you me, there is so many moving parts to this that we don't see, and we should all be so grateful for.
Because, of course, ordinarily, we're still watching these pictures. If you were going into the Palace of Westminster, I think, if memory serves me correctly, you need to at least show some sort of ID, I think, often. You'll have to have an official invitation, not to all the areas in the building, but there would also be the scanners that we have at airport security. Will they're obviously not having to be identity checked here, but will there be scanners for the bags and stuff to go through?
Oh yes, there's very much airport-style security in these queues before you get anywhere near the hall, and that, of course, is to be expected, and it's part of almost everyday life these days, isn't it? And so the members of the public uncomplainingly comply, of course, because security is absolutely paramount.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're looking at the crowds now walking down. Some of them will have been in the queue for probably 10 hours or so, I guess, as of this morning, walking through, probably rather relieved. And everybody, Helena, who we've spoken to and we've heard from, who's come out of Westminster Hall, say that they were surprised by how moving they found it once they'd entered the room.
Yeah, I mean, I can just imagine. I mean, I was watching it just last night on TV, the vigil, and it evoked emotion in me. So actually walking in and seeing everything and that quietness, I can see it.
Peter, there was all this controversy, of course, around Prince Harry wanting, I think, if I'm correct, wasn't there action for judicial review against whether the Queen was right to prevent him from having royal security detail while he's here? And then obviously the Queen has died. I don't know what the latest is on that. Do you know? Because obviously he's had to bring his own security personnel here from America, and the difference being that they can't have guns like the royal detail would have.
Yes, and it is a pretty thorny subject. Now, of course, President Biden is going to attend the funeral on Monday, and I suspect, because there has been precedents set in the past, that the President of the United States will be able to bring his own security detail who will be armed. There will be an exception made for President Biden, of that I am absolutely certain. Many other heads of state, when they come to the UK, have to comply and fall in line and are not allowed to have their own armed guards brought into the country. And often the Met Police picks up the responsibility for keeping those people safe while they're in the UK. But once again, this goes back to the unseen that I talk about this security operation. There is so much there which, quite rightly, we won't see, but believe you me, the wheels are turning properly and 24 hours a day.
Is this the kind of event, though, that you look back and you think, or you're watching it now and you think, oh, I'd quite like to be involved in an official capacity?
Well, I've seen many police officers and engaged with them on social media, and the sense of pride that they have of being able to take part in this operation, in whatever role that may be, is absolutely immense. Because whilst police officers have chief constables or a commissioner, if you're in the Met, who is ultimately their boss, so many of them regard the late Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth as the boss, the big boss, and that's what they still affectionately call her. And so it's a matter of huge pride for those officers who are shining their boots like they've never shined it before to take part in this.
And will those officers automatically transfer that respect and loyalty to our new King Charles, or will it take a little time, do you think?
Well, this week, the new Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, put forward the suggestion that all officers swear an oath of allegiance to the King, because he, in fact, did that on Monday. He only started as the Met Commissioner on Monday, so he was probably the first officer in the land to swear that oath of allegiance to the King. Now, I can see where he comes from, because every officer swears an oath of allegiance to the monarch, but times might change, things might change, and perhaps there might be a suggestion that officers should swear an oath of allegiance to the public. But we'll see. That's a long way off.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have more of these beautiful images for the rest of the weekend. Where will you be on Monday, Peter?
I'll be working, giving commentary on the events, predominantly around the policing and the security issues. And I sincerely hope that I have a very quiet day and that there is nothing out of the ordinary that I have to comment upon.
Because, of course, the risk is not just any sort of threat to life, but it's disruption. There's a certain, there's a real trend at the moment, isn't there, for activists to get their point across, be it Extinction Rebellion or climate, that idea that protest doesn't have to necessarily be a terrorist attack, but it could just be disruptive. That's probably a risk, isn't it?
Yeah, but there are potential threats everywhere, of course. The police's intelligence databases will be being trawled. There will be so much going on, yet again, that is unseen, but is very much happening. There's a threat, potentially, from terrorism. There's a threat from a lone wolf person who may be terrorist motivated or might be unwell. There is, of course, many other threats, as long as disruption, protest, all of which the police have to deal with, and they have to cater their approach for whatever potential disruption or threat that there is.
And I'm sure they will do a brilliant job. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. That's it from me for this afternoon, and in fact for the rest of the weekend. Do have a peaceful time, and I am going to hand over now to my mate, Neil Oliver.
Thank you, Bev. Thank you, Bev, for that. As you can see, we're continuing with our coverage from events in Westminster Hall this evening. With me tonight, I'm delighted to welcome a friend of the show, Lord Taylor of Warwick, and another friend, royal broadcaster and commentator, Rafe Heidel-Manku, who is running a marathon of royal commentary, and certainly not a sprint. It is quite something to see, as Bev and her guests were saying, the public being processing through this place in this way. It really is quite a unique sight, is it not?
It's remarkable. I should stop myself commentating there, because now we have the arrival of the Queen's grandchildren to mount this very special vigil. As we reported, the Prince of Wales and Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, are both wearing uniforms. They're wearing the uniforms of the Blues and Royals, of which they're both officers, having been raised to captain, even though they're now majors also in the British Army. We see Prince William wearing the sash of the Order of the Garter with his golden, diamond and platinum Jubilee medals and the Garter Star, remembering the Platinum Jubilee